Hello guys! Today's video is going to be my first impressions on the Archer & Olive Acrylograph pens. I'd like to start by saying that this video is not in association with Archer & Olive. I went out and bought these pens myself. I decided to buy 2 out of the 3 colour collections. So I got the Jewel collection and the Tropical collection, both in the 0.7mm tips. In each set there's a blending palette, as well as some instructions on how best to care for the pens and how best to use the pens. On the inside there's also instructions on how to blend with them as well. This set here is the Jewel collection. Like I said, I got these in the 0.7mm tips. I was going back and forth for a while about whether or not to get any of the 3mm tips, but I ended up just going for the 0.7 because I tend to do a lot more detail work, so I figured I'd get a lot more use out of them. So here is a close-up look at the 0.7mm tip. It's nice and fine and you'll be able to get a lot of detail when you're using it, but I guess we'll find that out soon. I think a really thoughtful little touch is the fact that each set also comes with a spare set of nibs just at the top here. You get 2 spare nibs, and I think that's really helpful in case you accidentally ruin one of them or damage it in any way. This is the blending pen, which I believe is just an empty pen so that you can collect ink in it and blend with it. Again, every set comes with one of these as well. So as I said, the other set that I got was the Tropical collection. These colours are very summery and bright. They come with the exact same packaging, so now we've had a look at that, let's get straight into testing them out. If you've used paint pens before, then you know that you need to activate them first. So in order to do this, you just press down on the nib on a piece of paper or on the blending palette, just until the ink flows to the end of the nib. I feel like in this video it looks like it took me a long time to activate them, but it really didn't. The ink flows pretty quickly once you start to activate them. It did vary between pens, but in general it was pretty quick. So now on to the most interesting part, testing them out. I decided to do swatches on all 3 types of paper that Archer & Olive stock. So that's the white paper, the blackout paper and the kraft paper. I started out with swatching on the white paper. First impressions of the pens were really good. They went down really smooth and really opaque. The only thing I would say is, as you can see here, I made a small mistake with the mustard colour and I tried to wipe it up with a tissue. However, all I really did was smudge the blue, so I would say that if you make a mistake, just cover it up with the Acrylograph pens, because if you don't, you'll try and wipe them up and smudge it like I did. And this is what all the colours from the Jewel collection look like on the white paper. I know I've already said it once, but I just love this colour combination. The earthy neutral tones are perfect for the kind of work that I do, so I'm looking forward to creating some more with these colours. Now on to swatching the Tropical collection. The next colour I'm going to swatch on is the blackout paper. and this one is the one that I was most curious about because I feel like there's not really that many supplies out there that you can use on a blackout journal, so I was really excited to see how these worked because it is one of my favourite types of journal to use. I was really impressed at how they went down on the black paper. I feel like they look slightly different on the black paper than they do on the white. Later on in the video you'll see a comparison between the black, the white and the kraft paper, and you'll kind of see what I mean. There's just a very, very tiny difference. But now to see what they look like on the kraft paper. This was the first time that I'd shaken them. Like I said earlier, I just wanted to test to see what they were like without shaking them because I'd seen on Bonnie's Instagram live that you had to shake them quite often, and I'm quite lazy, so I didn't really want to do it all the time, and that almost put me off, but I wanted to buy them and test it out. So if you're like me and you were concerned about the fact that you've got to shake them all the time, then I wouldn't be too worried because for me they seem to work fine without shaking them. Here's what all the swatches on all the different papers look like next to each other. As I said earlier, you can kind of see that the colours look slightly different on the different papers, but not too much. You can tell that they are from the same collection. I'd say that they all look pretty consistent across all three types of paper. Now that I've done all the swatches, let's move on to some tests that I really wanted to try. The first thing that I wanted to try was the blending, but I kind of made a mistake here because I tried blending 3 colours instead of 2 and it didn't really work out. I took the blending pen and the 3 colours and I put the one colour down and then picked it up with the blending pen and then did the same with the other 2. And as you can see when I draw it out, it doesn't really work. I think the 3rd colour just got lost in between the other 2, but that's my fault for trying to blend 3 instead of just sticking to 2 colours. For the next blending method though, I just stuck to Bonnie's instructions. So I took one colour and put it on the blending palette and then took the other colour and soaked some of that up, and this method worked a lot better. The colour flowed for a lot longer and it gave a really nice ombre effect. One thing that I wanted to know was, after blending, can you get the nib as clean as it was before? So I tried wiping on a tissue, which can be a little bit messy, but that didn't quite get the purple ink out of the blue pen. So after trying to let a bit of the blue ink flow out, it still wasn't perfectly clean. So I decided to rinse it under the tap, and this is what it looks like after I've rinsed it. Most of it's come off. I think there's still a tiny bit left. It just depends on if you're bothered by that sort of thing, but it doesn't bother me too much. When it comes to cleaning the blending palette, I tried using a dry tissue and nothing really happened, so I dampened it a little bit and the ink actually came off a lot easier than I thought. Once I'd finished, it ended up looking like it was brand new again, so I was pretty pleased with that. So now we've tested out the blending, I'm going to try something that I've not seen anyone do yet, which is to try and colour a large-ish area with the 0.7 tips. And that's because I've heard a few people say that you can't really colour in a large area with these, That disappointed me a bit because I couldn't afford both of the sets in both of the sizes of nibs, so I had to buy the size that I thought I would get the most use out of. So colouring this area didn't actually take that long, it just took a little bit of patience. And I did find that if you press on the pen and let a little bit of the ink flow onto the paper, you could kind of just spread it out with the tip, and that really worked to help speed it up. I did want to test an alternative method to see if there was an easier way of doing the same thing. So what I did was I drew the same size square, and then I put a little bit of the ink on the square in the same way, where I just let the ink flow from the pen. And then I grabbed a paintbrush with a teeny tiny bit of water on and used the paintbrush to spread the ink about. This method worked really well. It spread the paint out pretty easily and quickly, and it gave a pretty similar look to the one with just the pen. I'd say the main difference was that it wasn't quite as opaque, but it ended up a smoother finish than the one on the left. The next thing I wanted to try was the layering. So I wanted to see what it looked like on top of watercolour, gouache, and on top of the acrylograph itself. So I started by doing a swatch of watercolour and then a swatch of gouache, and then I drew a tiny illustration on top of all 4 squares just with the white acrylograph pen. So I started with the illustrations on the one where I'd just used the acrylograph to colour the square. It went on really well, there was no blending or bleeding, it just went on as a completely new layer. And then it was exactly the same on the one on the right, which is the one that I used the paintbrush to shade it in. The only difference really I would say is that it went on a tiny bit smoother on the one on the right because of the fact that it had the smoother texture to it to begin with. It went on just as nicely on the watercolour. Again, no blending, no bleeding or anything like that. And then exactly the same on the gouache. I did notice a little bit of the gouache ended up on the nib of the pen, but that's to be expected with gouache anyway because it can be reactivated. So overall for this test, I'd say that they go on top of things really well. They stay as a separate layer, so that's really good for layering and overlapping the colours. I also wanted to compare the acrylograph pens with the posca pens, so I grabbed the one that I use the most, which is the white one, and I compared the white posca pen with the white acrylograph pen. I thought that the best way to do this was just to create a little swatch of black gouache to put the pens on top of, just to see what they both look like in exactly the same test. I only did a tiny illustration for this test, but I feel like it's enough for us to see the comparison between the 2 pens. So both these pens were very similar in this test, but I feel like there was one main difference. And that difference is that to me, the Posca pen seems like it's thicker, and it does actually say on the Posca pen that it is a 0.7mm tip. So they're supposed to be the same size, but as I said, and as you can probably see here, the Posca pen is slightly thicker, and I would say that I prefer the acrylograph in this case, because as I said, I tend to do a lot more detail work, so it'll probably work best for me. And if you know me at all, there's one test that I absolutely couldn't have left without doing, and that is creating a piece of art with these pens. And after looking at these pens, I realised that some of the colours would work really beautifully as a sunset, so I decided to create a landscape with them. If you want to see the full process of me drawing this landscape, then I have actually uploaded it as a separate video as like a tutorial, where I go through exactly what I did and why I chose to do it, and you just get to see the process in a little bit more detail. I'll link that video in the clickable I button and in the description below. And here is a close-up of the finished piece. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think that the pens worked really well together, blended really well together and layered really well. That's all the swatching tested out, but there's one more important test we need to see, and that is whether or not there's any bleeding or ghosting on the other side. I don't really expect there to be any where the swatches are, but sometimes when you do a bigger painting, you do find that they're more likely to bleed through. So let's have a look. There's absolutely no bleeding or ghosting, just a little bit of buckling, but that's to be expected when you're using paints. It might be a little to do with the fact that I'm using the Archer and Olive bullet journal, and they work really well with paints. So if you're using a different bullet journal, maybe you will experience a little bit of ghosting or bleeding, but it won't be anything that you won't experience with any other paints in that journal, if that makes sense. So that concludes my first impressions of the Archer and Olive Acrylograph pens. If you do have any more questions, definitely feel free to leave them in the comments below and I'll try and answer them the best I can. Overall, I am really pleased with these pens and really excited to see what I can create with them in the future. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in my next video.